I pushed open the front door and the chemical bite of wet paint hit me before my bag even slid off my shoulder. My shoes were still slick from Salem rain. My arms heavy from a 12-hour shift at the diner out on Lancaster Drive. That endless strip where the neon buzzes like a tired insect and the grease never truly leaves your skin no matter how hot the shower. Two men in speckled overalls stood in my bedroom. My bedroom, rollers gliding up and down the walls I'd nursed into peach just months ago. My floral curtains lay crumpled, freckles of white like snowfall on a grave. The dresser I'd sanded and varnished on the kind of slow Sundays that feel like healing sat shoved to the middle of the room with a fresh scar of paint across its edge. What's going on? The words rasped out of me. Small and tinny. Sylvie leaned in the doorway as if she'd always owned the doorframe. Arms crossed. Lips folded into that clever little smile that meant I should grab a bucket and brace for the flood. "Oh, Marina," she said, light as weather. "You're home early. We're doing a few renovations before we move in. Thought we'd surprise you." "Move in." The younger painter froze mid-stroke. The older one kept rolling because some people survive by not looking at the explosion. I stared at the white bleeding over peach. At my curtains on the floor. At the dresser with its fresh wound. And felt the ache in my shoulders disappear in a single, bright jolt of disbelief. For months, this house had been my promise to myself. The proof that every double shift, every quarter counted and recounted. Every mile walked to save the bus fare had meant something. Watching her smile, it felt like my promise was being painted over in one long, indifferent stripe. I should have shouted. I should have said 100 things. All that came out was a whisper that tasted like tin. "Move in?" Sylvie tilted her head the way she does when she's already decided the ending. "You'll see. It'll be better this way." The paint smell thickened, the kind that clings to the back of your throat. My chest tightened as if the air itself were narrowing. Somewhere behind me a storm gutter ticked under the last of the rain. In the silence after her words, my mind fell backward along the crooked path that led me here. I'd lived paycheck to paycheck since 19. Clocking in before dawn at the diner on Lancaster Drive Northeast. The kind of road that never sleeps and pretends it's doing you a favor. Coffee. Hash. Too many refills. And the clatter of plates steady as a heartbeat. I'd count tips in the quiet after close. Coins and crumpled bills. And slide what was left into an envelope tucked inside a shoebox I hid under a nest of winter scarves. Student loans took their bite first. Rent on the shoebox apartment with the leaky ceiling and neighbors who argued so loud they turned into bedtime stories took the rest. Groceries. Utilities. The bus pass. It all felt like bleeding by 1,000 paper cuts. Nights off weren't rest. They were shifts in a different uniform. Bussing at weddings where the centerpieces cost more than my weekly tips. Scrubbing down kitchens. Babysitting for parents who kissed my cheek and told me I had a good heart like it could be swiped for rent. When friends bought new boots, I learned to darn mine. When coworkers ordered takeout, I collected their extra soy sauce packets and learned which leftovers tasted least like defeat when reheated. Every sacrifice pointed somewhere. I didn't know if the path ended at an apartment with no leaks or just a life where the fridge light didn't feel like a luxury. Then, on my 26th birthday, I signed papers for a weathered 2-bedroom on the north side of town. The siding peeled like sunburn. The yard had a stubborn bald patch by the stoop. And the bones creaked in the wind. But it was mine, in a market where the median listing price kept floating near $500,000. The little bungalow felt like a miracle earned the slow, unglamorous way. I stood in the empty living room, listening to my own breath scrape the quiet, and thought, no one can evict me from this. Not anymore. Realtor. +1. Now. With Sylvie's voice echoing, that thought felt childish. The word freedom is light in your mouth until someone tries to lift it from your hands. Her visits started like a drizzle. She'd arrive without calling, a latte in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. Set them down like an offering and walk my rooms as if she were a real estate agent showing a client a property she'd already sold. "You're what, 27? She'd say, pausing at my half-painted trim. "Houses are money pits, honey. Apartments are training wheels. You don't even know what can go wrong." I swallowed hard enough to hear it. I'd been asking myself those same questions lying awake under the hum of the refrigerator. What if the roof goes? What if the furnace coughs itself to death? What if one bad flu sends everything sliding? Then Daniel came. All straight lines and fixes. He stood in the living room and announced. Like someone naming a ship. This place would run better if we helped manage it. You're new to ownership. Mistakes are expensive. He didn't say, you can't handle it, but the words sat in the air between us like a folded knife. After they left, I'd catch myself remeasuring old decisions, holding them up to the fluorescent light of their voices until they looked wrong. Was the mortgage too ambitious? Was I selfish for wanting to do it alone? The house, which had felt like a lake I could finally float in, started to feel like a hallway with doors I needed permission to open. One Friday, I came home after close and my couch was angled toward the window, not the TV. My cookbooks were stacked like a curated display. The next morning the kitchen told on someone. Spices decanted into matching jars with labels facing forward. Pots exiled to high cabinets I never used. My chipped coffee mugs stacked out of order. A faint smear of Sylvie's perfume floated beside the sink like a signature. I checked the doors. No pry marks. No broken latch. Then the memory. 2 weeks earlier she'd asked for my keys to grab something from her car. How long does it take to copy a life? The answer is, however long you let someone hold your keys without asking why. When she came by the next weekend she breezed right past my tight jaw. You should let me keep things tidy, she said, opening my cabinets like they were hers to alphabetize. She picked up my phone from the counter. Recipe I texted you, she sang, thumbs flicking longer than any recipe ever needs. Don't be paranoid. The laugh she did after that landed like a door clicking shut from the outside. I started photographing the rooms before work each morning, the couch angle, the mugs, the way my shoes lined up by the door like soldiers awaiting inspection. At night I'd compare, circling the changes in my head with a red pen that no one could see. Some days nothing moved, other days the curtains hung differently or a paperback shifted just enough to make me question if I'd dreamed my own order. I logged everything in a pocket spiral I slid under my mattress. Dates, times, positions, the unspectacular evidence of a life arranged intentionally. I told Rosa as we wiped the last counter on a dead Tuesday. The diner humming with the kind of quiet that comes only when it's too late for pie and too early for eggs. My sister's in my house when I'm not there, I said. She copied my keys. Rosa's eyes sharpened, the kind that see storms before the rest of us smell rain. Marina, that's not family drama, that's trespassing. She said the word like a nail being driven. Oregon calls unauthorized entry criminal trespass. Even the second-degree kind is a crime. You don't need to wait for her to be reasonable. Oregon laws. +1. I shrugged, heat crawling up my neck. Who's going to believe me? It's her word against mine. Then get more than your word. She tore a napkin, scribbled a name and number. Whitaker, housing attorney in Portland. My cousin used him when her landlord tried something shady. She pressed something else into my palm, a small brass keychain you'd find at a gas station. The word boundaries stamped across it in stubborn letters. Put your house key on that, she said. Every time you unlock your own door, remember whose lock it is. The brass was heavier than it looked. At home, I clipped my key on it and slid the weight into my pocket. Sometimes a talisman is nothing but a story you tell yourself. Other times it's a story that talks back. The pounding came on a gray Sunday. The kind of sky that makes everything look like an old photograph. I opened the door to find Sylvie on the porch with 2 duffels. Her kids fidgeting behind her. Daniel at the steps with his arms folded like a bouncer. We need to move in, she announced, stepping past the threshold on a sentence. Our landlord gave us 3 days. We've got nowhere else. I blocked the entry with my body because I have one and it works. This is my house, I said. You can't decide you live here. Don't be selfish, she snapped, and her sweetness cracked like spun sugar under a finger. You have 2 bedrooms. The kids need a roof. Her voice rose just enough for Mrs. Ramirez across the street to part her curtain. A couple walking their dog slowed the leash. Heat burned up my face. But I didn't move. You've crossed too many lines, I said. And the sentence steadied as it left me. Found its legs in the air. This is my home. I won't let you take it. For a flicker of a second. Her eyes slid, surprise. Maybe fear that the performance had found its heckler. She grabbed a bag, motioned the kids and Daniel down the steps. This isn't over, she hissed just for me. The car pulled away. Silence flooded the porch. Inside, I pressed my back to the door and felt the wood against my shoulder blades. Solid as a vow. The word freedom is light until it isn't. The word boundary is just a stamp on brass until you hold it in a shaking hand and realize you're the wall. Outside, the rain had washed the street clean. Inside, the smell of paint lingered like a dare. I walked to the bedroom and lifted the crumpled curtains. Dotted in white, the roller marks gleamed wet on the peach I'd picked for the way it made mornings look kinder. I set the curtains gently on the chair and said it out loud because sometimes the mouth has to teach the heart. This is my house. The floor creaked, old bones settling. Somewhere down Lancaster, a siren wailed, a reminder that the world outside had its own wars and I was not the only one learning to hold a line. Maybe independence doesn't arrive with a deed. Maybe it arrives with a key and a refusal. And then it has to be defended again and again. Like repainting the same wall until the color belongs to you. Sylvie didn't vanish after that storm on the porch. If anything, she seeped back in like water, finding cracks in the foundation. The very next Saturday, I was halfway through trimming the hallway baseboards when the doorbell chimed. Sharp and insistent. I hesitated, brush dripping in my hand. When I opened the door, there she was, latte in one hand, a paper bag of groceries in the other. Smiling like last week's showdown had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. She walked straight past me into the kitchen, set the bag on the counter, and started unloading apples into the bowl I'd picked up from a thrift store. Brought you some things, she said, her voice a little too bright. You looked tired last week. You shouldn't be working yourself to death over this place. Her tone was honey, but every drop stung. I stood frozen, watching her slide items into my fridge as if the shelves belonged to her. Sylvie, I began, voice low but firm. You can't just. She cut me off with a laugh. Relax, Marina, I'm helping. You're 27, barely making it on diner tips. Houses are money pits. Roof repairs alone can bankrupt you. She leaned against the counter, sipping her latte. Honestly, I worry. You're young. You should be living your life. Not shackled to bills and paint fumes. The words dug under my skin because they echoed my own late-night worries. I thought about the furnace I hadn't serviced. The shingles that rattled in the wind. The student loan reminders piling up in my inbox. Was I foolish for thinking I could do this alone? Sylvie had a way of turning my doubts into a weapon she wielded with casual precision. It didn't stop there. She began dropping by unannounced every weekend. Sometimes with her kids in tow. Other times alone with Daniel. When Daniel came, the air thickened. He never bothered with sugarcoating. You know, Marina, he said one evening, stepping into the living room as if it were his office. This house would run smoother if we helped manage it. You've never owned property. Mistakes are expensive. We could save you a lot of grief. The way he said it wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. I forced a laugh. But inside, a pit opened wide. My living room, once my safe harbor, felt suddenly like a courtroom where I was always the defendant. Every word they spoke nudged me closer to believing I couldn't handle my own dream. Neighbors began to notice their constant presence. Mrs. Ramirez mentioned one morning how nice it must be to have family helping you settle in. I smiled weakly, unable to explain the way my own home was being colonized inch by inch. To outsiders, Sylvie looked generous, supportive. No one saw the sharp edge hidden beneath her sweetness. One Sunday, she caught me repainting the trim I'd botched earlier in the week. She tilted her head, a smile tugging at her lips. Still working at that diner? She asked. Voice feather light but cutting. How long do you think you can keep that up? One bad flu, and you'll be underwater. Houses don't wait for paychecks. Marina. Her words made my hands tighten around the brush. I wanted to shout that I had survived worse. That every inch of this house was proof of sacrifices she never had to make. But the words stuck. Instead, I stared at the chipped paint, wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe the house was too big. The dream too fragile. Doubt seeped in like damp rot under floorboards. When they left, the silence didn't feel like relief. It felt like waiting for the next knock. The next smile wrapped around a knife. I began second-guessing decisions I had been proud of just days earlier. Was the mortgage too much? Was the roof worse than I thought? Was I selfish for clinging to independence when family offered help? By the time the door shut behind them, I no longer felt like the owner of my own home. I felt like a tenant begging for approval. One evening, Sylvie lingered at the doorway longer than usual. She slipped her hand into mine, squeezing with practiced warmth. Her eyes held mine, soft on the surface but with something harder beneath. "You'll thank me one day," she whispered. "I'm just looking out for you." Her grip tightened, not comforting, but possessive, like a leash disguised as love. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, pulse racing. For the first time, I wondered if her visits weren't just intrusions, but rehearsals for something bigger. Each smile, each bag of groceries, each dig about my job, they weren't random. They were steps in a choreography I hadn't agreed to. A slow dance meant to edge me out of my own life. And yet, when the house fell silent again, I couldn't shake the echo of her words. Was I too young? Too naive? Could I really hold this place together without breaking? The walls seemed to lean closer, listening, waiting for me to answer. That night, I lay awake under the soft hum of the refrigerator, staring at the ceiling. I replayed every sacrifice, every coin scraped into that shoebox, every shift survived at the diner. The house wasn't just wood and paint. It was my proof, and Sylvie was trying to erase it with every casual smile. Still, fear lingered, curling in my chest. I realized with a chill that her hand on mine wasn't just about comfort. It was about control, and if I didn't find a way to stop her, one day soon, she'd stop asking to move in. She'd simply stay. The change didn't happen with slammed doors or shouted words. It slipped in silently, the way a draft finds its way under an old window. One Friday night, after a double shift of scrubbing pans at the diner, I trudged home with my shoes squelching from the rain and my hands raw from bleach. I dropped my keys on the table and paused. The couch sat angled toward the window, not the television. My cookbooks were stacked neatly on the coffee table like a display in a bookstore. At first, I thought exhaustion had blurred my memory. Maybe I had rearranged things myself? But the next morning, the kitchen told the truth. My spices, once huddled together in mismatched bottles, were now in uniform glass jars, each label turned forward as if for an inspection. The pots I kept within arm's reach were shoved to the top shelf. Even my chipped coffee mugs, each one with a story, were stacked in the wrong order. The air held a faint trace of Sylvie's perfume, the one she wore when she wanted to project sophistication. I stood there, my chest tight, realizing the walls weren't safe anymore. She had been inside without me. I checked the locks, but nothing looked forced. That's when a memory flared. 2 weeks earlier, Sylvie had asked for my keys. Said she'd left something in her car and needed to grab it. She must have made copies then. The thought curdled my stomach. How many times had she been here since? What else had she touched? When she came by the next weekend, she was all sunshine. "You really should let me help you keep this place organized," she said, gliding into the kitchen as if it were hers. She picked up my phone from the counter, thumb tapping across the screen. "Just checking that recipe I texted you." She laughed when I frowned. "Don't be paranoid, Marina. You're so uptight about your things." The laugh lingered long after she left, bouncing through the empty house like a taunt. That night, I did something I never thought I'd do. Before heading to work the next morning, I took my phone and snapped photos of every corner, the angle of the couch, the way my shoes lined up by the door, the chipped mugs in their familiar stack. When I returned, I compared the photos with what I found. Sometimes nothing had changed, other times a curtain was tied differently, or a book was missing from the shelf. I began logging everything in a spiral notebook I hid beneath my mattress. Dates, times, the smallest shifts in my sanctuary. It gave me a strange calm, like I was reclaiming proof of my own reality. If Sylvie wanted to rewrite my home, at least I would hold onto the original draft. But the act of documenting didn't erase the dread. It only deepened the sense that I was living in a space being slowly rewritten by someone else. Each night I lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering if the sound of creaking wood was just the house settling, or someone moving where they didn't belong. I confided in Rosa one slow Tuesday as we wiped down counters at the diner. The words slipped out before I could stop them. My sister's in my house when I'm not there. She copied my keys. Rosa froze, rag still in her hand. Her eyes narrowed the way they did when a customer tried to stiff us on tips. Marina, that's not just family drama. That's trespassing. She said it like a sentence being handed down. You need to stand up to her. Or at least get someone in your corner. I shook my head, embarrassed. Who's going to believe me? It's her word against mine. Rosa wasn't the type to shrug off trouble. The next day, she pressed a folded napkin into my hand. A name and number scribbled in bold ink. Whitaker, housing lawyer in Portland. My cousin used him when her landlord tried to scam her. Rosa explained. You call him. Promise me. I tucked the napkin into my apron pocket, the ink bleeding faintly onto the fabric. The idea of calling a lawyer made my stomach tighten. I'd never thought of my fight with Sylvie in legal terms. But wasn't that exactly what it had become? Before I could answer, Rosa pulled out a small brass keychain. The kind sold at gas stations. Bold letters stamped across it read one word: boundaries. She pressed it into my palm. Put your house key on this, she said, so every time you use it, you remember whose lock it really is. The brass was heavier than it looked. I clipped my key onto it that night, slipped it into my pocket, and held it tight like a talisman. But even with that small anchor, the fear didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. Each creak of the floorboards after dark sounded like footsteps. Each time I left for work, I wondered if I'd come back to find more of myself erased. The notebook grew thicker with entries. Dates, photos, details. I began to see a pattern in Sylvie's visits. Saturday afternoons, late Sunday mornings, always when I was away. My stomach twisted with every realization. But documenting gave me a weapon. However fragile, I thought I was prepared. I thought I could endure her intrusions as long as I had proof. But nothing prepared me for the Sunday when she showed up again, this time not with groceries or coffee, but with duffel bags and her children trailing behind her. Daniel waited at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed like a sentinel. Her smile was gone. In its place was something colder, sharper. We need to move in, she said. Her tone wasn't a request. It was a declaration. I stood in the doorway, brass key warm in my pocket, my pulse thundering in my ears. This was no longer about groceries or casual visits. This was about invasion. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of the storm pressing against my fragile walls. The gray Sunday light hadn't faded when Sylvie tried to step past me, her duffel bag bumping against the doorframe as though the house had already agreed to her arrival. Behind her, the kids shifted uneasily, too young to understand the tension but old enough to sense the battle lines. Daniel didn't move from the bottom of the steps. His crossed arms and stone-cold expression spoke louder than words. He expected me to fold. I blocked the threshold with my whole body. This is my house, I said, the brass key in my pocket like a hot coal. You can't just show up and decide you live here. Her smile cracked. The sweetness that had always masked her words dropped, replaced with the raw edge I knew from childhood arguments. From every slammed door when we were younger. Don't be selfish, Marina. We're family. You've got 2 bedrooms. Are you really going to let my kids sleep in the street? The kids looked up at me, their eyes wide, and my chest squeezed painfully. But I held my ground. I'm not turning them away. I'm saying you can't live here. There are other options. You can stay with Daniel's family. You can find something else. But this place, I pressed my palm to the doorframe, this isn't yours. Her voice rose high enough to catch Mrs. Ramirez's attention across the street. Curtains twitched. 2 men walking their dogs slowed their steps. Listening, Sylvie seized the moment, pitching her voice so the whole block could hear. Listen to her. After everything I've done for her. After all this family has been through. She slams the door in her sister's face. Heat rushed up my neck. But I forced myself to look directly at her. You've crossed too many lines already. My words came steadier than I expected. This is my home. I won't let you take it. For the first time, her confidence faltered. The mask slipped, and in her eyes I saw something close to fear. A flicker of doubt that her performance might not be working. She grabbed one bag and motioned sharply for Daniel and the kids to follow. This isn't over, she hissed in a low voice only I could hear. When the car finally pulled away, silence fell over the street, broken only by the drip of water from the gutters. I pressed my back to the door, my pulse hammering. Saying no once didn't feel like victory. It felt like the opening move in a long war. 2 days later, Sylvie returned. This time, she didn't bring bags. She brought papers, folded sheets pressed tight in her hands. Eyes bright with triumph. I just want to clear things up, she said sweetly, too sweetly. I unfolded the papers. Printed screenshots of text messages stared back at me. Each one stamped with my number. Come live with me, Sylvie. The house is too big for one person. Bring the kids. We'll figure it out together. My throat went dry. These aren't mine. Her head tilted with pity. You must have forgotten. You've been so stressed working those shifts. People slip sometimes. Another stack appeared. Receipts for a bedroom set. A television. Kitchenware. Each one bore my bank account number. My account. The same one I guarded like a secret. Dipping into it only when absolutely necessary. You're welcome, she said lightly. I made improvements that benefit us all. This lodged in my chest like a thorn. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence of a life I hadn't chosen. Had she guessed my password? Had she rifled through my phone longer than I realized? The edges of my memory blurred. I flipped through my notebook, rereading lines I had written just to reassure myself they were real. But then the rumors started. Mrs. Ramirez asked if I was feeling all right. Mentioned that Sylvie had told her I'd been forgetting things. At the diner, a busboy joked about me leaving my apron behind, twice. Sylvie had been whispering, bending reality until people believed I was slipping. Late at night, alone in the house, I began to wonder, was she right? Was I losing track of more than I realized? But then I felt the brass keychain Rosa had given me. Cool and solid in my palm. That weight was real. The boundaries were real. I wasn't losing my grip. Someone was trying to pry it loose. So I gathered the forged texts, the receipts, and my notebook, and I carried them to Portland. My hands trembled as I slid them across the polished desk of Mr. Whitaker. The housing lawyer Rosa had recommended. He was gray-haired, calm, the kind of man who considered every word before he spoke. These messages aren't genuine, he said, tapping one with his pen. Metadata doesn't lie. There are markers of an app-generated conversation. If she presents these in court, we can dismantle them. Relief loosened the knot in my chest, but only slightly. She's already spreading stories that I'm unstable. People believe her. That's why you need more than your word. Whitaker replied. Document everything. Photos, dates, witnesses. Neighbors who saw the porch argument. Coworkers who can vouch for you. It all matters. He leaned forward. And one more thing. Change your locks immediately. Every door, every entry. Do not wait. I left his office with my notebook clutched tight. My brass keychain heavy in my pocket. Outside, Portland traffic roared, indifferent to the battles playing out inside small houses like mine. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. For the first time, I understood this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a siege, and if I wanted to hold on to the life I had fought so hard to build, I would need to fight back with everything I had. That night, as rain streaked the windows, I stood in my kitchen staring at the nail where I planned to hang the brass keychain. Independence, I realized, wasn't guaranteed by a deed. It was something you had to defend. Again and again. And Sylvie had just made it clear. The war was only beginning. The morning after meeting Whitaker, I woke with the sense that every corner of the house was watching me. The shadows along the hallway seemed deeper. The silence more brittle. I barely had time to sip my coffee before headlights cut across my yard. A battered pickup rumbled to a stop. And Mark, Rose's brother-in-law, stepped out carrying a toolbox. His presence was like oxygen. He didn't waste words, just got to work. I trailed him as he moved from door to door, pulling out the old locks, dropping them with a clank into a metal bucket. Each sound was a funeral bell for the days when Sylvie had free entry into my life. "You'll want 3 sets, Mark said, pressing the new brass keys into my palm when he was done. "One for you, one spare hidden safe, one with someone you trust." The edges bit cold into my skin. I slipped one onto the keychain Rosa had given me. Boundaries gleamed in block letters, catching the early morning light. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control return. That fragile sense of security didn't last long. At 6 the next morning, fists rattled my door hard enough to shake the frame. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers on the porch. Behind them stood Sylvie, folder clutched to her chest, triumph written across her face. "Ms. Hale," one officer said, "we've received a complaint. Your sister claims you're holding her belongings and preventing her access to the property." Sylvie stepped forward, flipping the folder open with a flourish. "She invited us to live here. I have the texts. She just forgets." She handed the printouts to the officers. Those same forged messages Whitaker had shown me were fake. Each line dripped with a version of me that didn't exist. My hands shook, but I forced my voice steady. "Those are fake. This house is mine, and I never gave permission." I hurried to fetch the folder I'd prepared. The deed with my name alone. Photos of furniture moved without consent, and my notebook filled with dates and details. The officers studied the papers, glancing back and forth between us. Before doubt could settle, headlights swept across the yard again. Whitaker stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand. He greeted the officers calmly, then asked to see Sylvie's printouts. Within minutes, he pointed out the inconsistencies. "These are fabricated," he said, tapping the corner of a page. "The metadata shows they were generated through a third-party app. If this goes further, the forgery itself could be prosecuted." The officers stiffened. One turned to me. "Do you want these items removed from the house now? Under supervision?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded. For the next hour, Sylvie and Daniel carried their belongings out under the office's watchful eyes. The bedroom set they had purchased with my stolen money, the television, the neatly packed boxes, all of it disappeared piece by piece. I stood by the window, brass key warm in my hand, watching them strip away the evidence of their invasion. Sylvie didn't cry. She didn't plead. She moved with rigid determination, her eyes darting toward me every time she passed. When the last box was gone, she paused on the porch. Her smile was thin, her voice low, meant only for me. "This isn't finished." Then she turned, her car door slamming like a gunshot. When the patrol car rolled away, silence fell heavy and clean. I closed the door, pressed my back against it, and let the quiet settle. For the first time in months, the house stood bare of her presence. But the victory tasted sharp, edged with warning. I walked from room to room, each space echoing with absence. No perfume lingering in the air, no furniture angled wrong, no mugs stacked out of order. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm, still, tense, waiting for the next wave. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, hand poised above the page. For once, I had no new intrusion to record. Just the faint memory of Sylvie's hiss. "This isn't finished." I wrote the words down anyway. Proof that I hadn't imagined them. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Because deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. I had won one battle. But Sylvie wasn't done. The morning after the police left, the house felt foreign in its quiet. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls, the window frames, the chipped mugs stacked the way I had left them. For the first time in weeks, nothing had shifted. No perfume lingered. No books were out of place. It was just me and the house I had fought for. The silence pressed against me like a bomb. But beneath it was an unease. A knowledge that peace like this would never come without a fight. I didn't waste time. That week, with Whitaker's guidance, I filed for a restraining order. The paperwork was thick and exhausting, each page demanding that I lay out my reality in black ink. Dates, times, witnesses, the forged texts. The receipts she had slipped into my life like poison seeds. Every signature felt like carving my story into stone. A refusal to let her version overwrite mine. Mark returned with his toolbox. This time carrying more than locks. He installed a small camera above the front porch. Another near the back gate. Watching the screen glow on my phone gave me a strange comfort. For once, I wasn't just reacting. I was guarding. I was prepared. Rosa came by on a Saturday morning. 2 heavy bags of potting soil slung over her arms. Her smile fierce as ever. "If you're going to draw a line," she said, "draw it where people can see it." Together, we knelt in the dirt along the walkway. I pressed daisies into the earth. She planted lavender, the air filling with its sharp, clean scent. Each flower felt like a declaration. A promise that this space was mine. That beauty could bloom even after intrusion. The sun warmed my shoulders as soil clung to my hands. For the first time in months, I felt light seep back into my chest. When the garden was finished, I stepped back and stared at it, rows of color bright against the gray siding. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt since signing those house papers. Pride untouched by fear. Inside, I found a nail and hung the brass keychain Rosa had given me on the kitchen wall. The word boundaries gleamed against the paint. Catching the late afternoon sun, I stood there a long time, staring at it. I remembered the first time Sylvie had crossed my threshold. The way my chest had tightened. The way I had whispered, "Move in," like a child asking permission. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who had learned that independence wasn't guaranteed by a deed or a set of keys. It was a choice you defended. Again and again. With ink. With witnesses. With cameras. With your own voice steady in the face of doubt. At night, lying in bed, I heard the old bones of the house creak. The refrigerator hum. The occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. But for once, I didn't flinch at the sounds. They weren't intrusions. They were reminders that the house was alive. Breathing with me. Still, I knew storms didn't vanish just because you latched the windows. Sylvie's voice echoed in the back of my mind. This isn't finished. And maybe she was right. Maybe she would try again. But as I looked at the glow of the security camera on my phone, at the flowers swaying in the yard, at the brass keychain catching the last rays of sun, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Independence was fragile, yes, but fragile things could still endure. They could still shine. I pressed my hand to the cool wall of the kitchen and whispered, "This is my home." The words didn't tremble this time. They landed solid, rooted. And in that moment, I knew, whatever came next, I would meet it with pride. Not fear.